Thank you to the conference organizers for inviting me, and thank you to the most excellent translators. Just to orient you, too fast. My libraries right there on the university campus. There's Diamond Head and Waikiki out here. Okay, here's the front of my library, and then here's my computer room. When I was told about this panel, the first thing that occurred to me was that without Moore's Law, nothing we're doing with technology in libraries could possibly take place. Sun Microsystems co-founder and former Cisco vice president Andy Bechtolsheim predicted that the performance of networking chips, which determine how quickly you can surf the internet, will improve 1,000 times in the next 20 years. And that prediction, along with the 1965 prediction by Gordon Moore of Intel that the number of transistors on a chip will double every 2 years, is still holding up, which is why we can do the powerful things that we're doing and why the changes that we heard about in the keynote are going to be so amazing. Then I thought about this pretty well-known quote from William Dixon: the future is already here, it's just unevenly distributed. And I think that libraries benefit from the first, Moore's Law, and the increasing speed of technology, and we are experiencing the uneven distribution right now. Okay, but thinking about Moore's Law and the topic of this panel, my notes just went. I made a list of possible topics when I thought about the assignment for this panel, which was to review and analyze the current situation of the university library and the impact of the globalized environment in the use of technological tools to provide library products and services. That's a really big topic. I believe that libraries would be nearly extinct if it were not for the technological transformations that have happened and that we embrace, even though we have not all fully embraced it. And these various technology systems and services and tools occurred to me as I thought about the topic. I thought about, of all those topics, what could I talk about that I knew anything really about, because I'm not a deep researcher like many of the panelists. And these are the areas that my university library has been active in the last 15 years or so. Has Google killed libraries? Well, maybe. At least some of the older functions. As early as 2006, in a report to Library of Congress, Karen Calhoun of Cornell University noted, today a large and growing number of students and scholars routinely bypass the library catalogs in favor of other discovery tools, and the catalog represents a shrinking proportion of the universe of scholarly information. In the introduction to her report, she said, today the catalog operates against a backdrop of flat or declining use of library collections, flashy and powerful alternatives for information discovery, rapid changes in information technology, rising expectations of library patrons, a rapid increase in new kinds of digital assets, mass digitization projects, and an incipient revolution in scholarly information exchange. But these are interesting times. I was looking at the Marshall Breeding's survey of technology trends in library systems for 2013. And he says that the next step for library systems, what we used to call our OPACs, our online catalogs, is that rather than just refining and rebuilding products, on the same models of functionality in place since the early decades of library automation, 40, 50 years ago now. Efforts are underway to break free from historical approaches and create new products that embrace current technology architectures. And he believes that the new approaches and products are designed to better align with the multifaceted realities of library collection and services. Okay. Discovery and delivery services was the big topic 4 years ago. Discovery services, I think, are now being widely used in a number of libraries, and we too implemented one. Oops, where am I? In early 2004, we first started with the open URL system so that we could link indexes of journals directly to the full text. And this was a really big change for us. But as Marshall Breeding states, especially for academic libraries that have made large investments in scholarly electronic resources, it's becoming essential to deploy services that provide easier and more efficient ways for patrons to make use of these materials. And this was where we started, with OpenURL. Again, you'll see I really like this article. It actually was not well received in our library that there was a need for discovery tools broader than the online catalog. But in 2008, the library went through a big strategic planning process, and action teams were formed as a result of that process, and one of them was to review, recommend, and outline an implementation plan for one or more software, electronic products, or services which enhance seamless discovery, access, and/or delivery of library resources and services. The team investigated and made a report and submitted it and recommended LibraryFind. But no further action was taken on this front. And in retrospect, that's a good thing because LibraryFind seems to have died, and in late 2011, the library signed a contract with Ex Libris to continue our current library management system, but to put in place the Primo Discovery tool. And that meant that we had to phase out our original serial solution OpenURL system and put in place SFX, which is the Ex Libris OpenURL system. I thought that this was pretty well summed it up. The construction of digital libraries have certainly framed technological changes, particularly with regard to various aspects of scale, and indeed have given rise to substantial progress in these and other technical fields. And this is Clifford Lynch stating that he believes that the greatest significance of digital libraries has been at a more profound intellectual level, inviting us to envision new kinds of environments for knowledge discovery, formulation, and dissemination. Again, this has been, some of our other speakers have talked about that. Okay, we've just implemented Primo, and at this point it's too soon to say if the OneSearch, which is their equivalent to OCLC WorldShare, is really going to increase use or interest in our library catalog as a discovery tool. So we've pursued other avenues to make our digital resources as widely findable as possible. We've implemented OEI harvesting of all of our repositories and our digital image collections into OCLC WorldCat. Okay, in 2004, the reason we started all those, the open URL and everything, we had a new associate university librarian come on board, and he presented this plan to the library staff and the administration for developing a repository program. And His arguments then were that it was a key element of the NSF initiative, and since that time, many other U.S. federal funding agencies have made a requirement of open depositories for research. And he wanted to look at DSpace because it was being widely used in the U.S. At a number of academic libraries. And it fit into our what was current at the time for the university's strategic initiatives. His arguments were that the library's role shifted to providing digital information services. That the scholarly communication crisis, as it was called then, too much data, not enough time, and that we had, because of our location, an obligation and an opportunity to provide digital access to Hawaiian historical and cultural materials. Plus, we needed to get into supporting grant activities, moving our university archives out of the print warehouse museum state that it was in and into the 21st century. And this support of a Hawaiian place of learning, this is part of the university system's strategic goals. A little difficult to interpret in the library context, but we're working on it. So he said in his presentation, we stand at a crossroads. We have within our reach the ability to make the library a steward of university information, a virtual classroom for students, a guardian of Hawaiian historical and cultural materials, and a vital part of the future for the university and the state. Beyond the financial cost of making this transition, there's a need to see our mission and our jobs in a new light. And I think that speaks to yesterday's panels about library application. However it's successful, we can make the library an even more vital part of the university community. Glowing words, we're going for it. 2 months later, a flood completely destroyed the basement of our library, which included the government documents and maps collection and our computer room. Oops, doing it again. This is too sensitive. Yes. That's me in the mud the next morning. That was my first digital collection server. Everything looked like this. Okay. In retrospect, this was a blessing in disguise. Everything was destroyed. We were forced to reconstruct and reinvent our systems and our services. Because we had no ready funding and needed to restore our systems and services, we turned to open source software. The new general public license was created in 1989, and the open source initiative was founded in February 1998. By mid-2001, Microsoft was denouncing open source software as an intellectual property destroyer, a sure sign that it was more than just a hobby for a few hackers. So, when we rebuilt our server, we switched from proprietary Sun to Apache. Linux Apache is our web server. DSpace had already been identified, and luckily this too is also open source. And we implemented for our internal use open source software that I'm not sure many people are familiar with, but our state government was also using this for their internal intranet, so we figured we would go with that, and we needed a way to communicate with our staff because everyone was dispersed out of the building because it was destroyed. I mean, there was no electricity, there was no lights, and we needed, sort of our first move into the cloud, a place to put communications for all these people who were not physically anymore in the library while we rebuilt. So, we started our first DSpace institutional repository, literally, rising out of the mud. And our specific goals were the long-term storage of digital materials, assigning persistent network identifiers to that material so they could always be findable, and to make sure that they wanted to, this was the pitch we gave to the faculty. We wanted to recapture our institution's intellectual content from commercial publishers and provide local control of content and open access. Because our faculty were doing free editorial work, giving their, signing their rights away for their articles, and in some cases they would be in journals that we didn't have a subscription to, so literally our students could not easily access the full text of what our faculty were producing. And we wanted to demonstrate the importance of the library for dissemination of university research. We started with 12 communities. This is the very vanilla plain DSpace out of the box look, and it's not terribly exciting. We started with 12 communities and 940 files, and as of just last month, we had 488 communities and 32,247 files in our repository, a scholar-space repository, and it now looks like this. That's a pretty impressive growth rate. Our repositories have global scope because of our position in the Pacific. Our university has national research centers for Chinese studies, Japanese studies, Korean studies, Okinawan studies. The last four don't have national research centers, but there are centers for Pacific Island studies, Philippine studies, South Asian studies, and Southeast Asian studies. One of our, is an example of we have small data, and it is here in the language documentation community. We are hosting and saving for them. They have native speakers of very rare languages. If they come through the program, they make recordings of words in that language. So we actually have the raw recordings in this repository. And use of it has come from all over the globe. In fact, there's Mexico City right there. Kind of amazing. As our institutional repository grew, and we had a very positive response from most faculty, the library hosted Open Access Week for the first time in October 2009. And our building had just been returned to normal. We did not move in until the end of 2008. In 2010, we organized a second Open Access Week, and we went campus-wide and worked with our faculty senate to pass a resolution, an open access resolution. Did a workshop, Scholarly Communication 101 workshop, which further enlightened the faculty about the open access, how open access was good for them. In 2011, one of my staff members went around to all the departments and everywhere else she could go, made numerous presentations, and organized the third Open Access Week campus-wide celebration. And the UHM Open Access Policy officially was approved by our Chancellor in March 2012. And the university system joined the Coalition of Open Access Policy Institutions. Okay, I'm going to switch a little bit. I think this argument now that creating digital collections and preserving them has economic value. It's now, people accept that, but even a few years ago it was a hard sell. And I think this is something that people have touched on, that digital collections represent significant potential economic and social value, provided they are made easily accessible. This was an interesting study by the Dutch Foundation for Economic Research, which carried out an analysis of the economic and social costs and benefits of making cultural heritage available digitally. And they show that on balance, the total benefits of digitization and accessibility outweigh the cost of creating the systems. And this provides immediate benefits from the widespread availability of cultural heritage objects. This was our first digital scanning project. It was for the collection of It was for a collection described as having significant cultural and historical value. These were photographs from the Trust Territory of the Pacific, taken during the period of the United States trusteeship, which was from 1951 to 1984. In the early 1980s, the United States began to close down the U.S. presence, and Sam McFeeters, who was a member of the Trust Territory's High Commission staff, started a program to preserve the records of the Trust Territory government, because the United States people were just basically going to throw it all away. And in collaboration with the University of Hawaii Library, they microfilmed all the documents that they could find and gathered together all the photographs from the files and deposited them with the University Library. There were 6,000 photographs from a total selected from a total of 50,000, and the digitization of those was funded by a U.S. grant system called Title II-C in 1992, and this is what we used in those days. We had Windows 3.1 and an AGFA DuoScan scanner, which I might add, this scanner was still in use until last year. Great product. Unfortunately, it was only a standalone system at that point. The images were not available outside the library until we had the internet in late 2000. This is what our current scanner looks like, a far cry from the first one. This will do up to A1 size scanning in 600 DPI, and we're doing a joint project right now between the Japan collection in the University of Hawaii Library and the University of the Ryukyu's library in Okinawa. And they are digitizing specialized rare materials from one of the collections in our library using the scanner. And the material will eventually end up in this digital archive, which the Ryukyu University is running. And their mission in the system is to digitally archive, provide educational and research resources of the old literature on Ryukyu, Okinawa. This is apparently the script in Okinawa was different from the script in Japan, and this needs to be translated even into Japanese for people to use it. So their aim with this development system is to promote the use of global cultural and archival systems. They're having scholars create synopses in modern languages, Japanese and English translations, to help people understand this material. Their mission says that they want that the ability to get close to material that was difficult to access is going to not only permanently save this valuable material, but it will expose it worldwide and contribute to academic research. I wish I could show you how this worked in reality, because it's a very cool system. I'll try and find it. Okay, so we started with that first photograph collection, and now we have almost 40 digital image collections and 18 that are just sort of flat web pages at this point. The original flat websites were to showcase our digital surrogates from special collections and various historical documents in the library that we wanted to make searchable. So we began using open source digital library application called StreetPrint in 2005. It's very similar to the currently sort of in use open source system called Omeka, if anyone has seen that. Okay, so the StreetPrint software was open source. It was created in 2003, came from Canada. It grew out of the Canada Research Chair Humanities Computing Studio project. They wanted to create a computerized and integrated multimedia humanities research center to unite humanities research and digital technology. Wow. The first collection that was digitized were these British pamphlets, street literature, hence the name StreetPrint. It's sort of meaningless, but we keep it. When we looked at it, the good points were that it had templates. You could easily generate a site and easily customize it to make it appealing. Its bugs were that, or its drawbacks was that it was a little buggy. It was only Dublin core metadata. There was no cross-collection search. We didn't know if it was scalable. It didn't have any batch upload, but it was there. It was good. It seemed to work for our purposes. Our first StreetPrint site was Save Our Surf, which is an interesting collection from the Hawaiian collection that was mostly unpublished material from an organization historically tied to environmental, social, political, and cultural movements in Hawaii that became part of what was known as the Hawaiian Renaissance in the 1970s. So it turned out that this first collection was actually going to address the university's goal of having a Hawaiian place of learning, in the sense that we're making these unpublished, unknown documents available worldwide. The Save Our Surf organization eventually gave rise to the Surfrider Foundation, which operates today in the U.S., and it has chapters in Argentina, Australia, Brazil, Europe, Japan, and the Pacific Rim. Over the 8 years that we've been using StreetPrint, we've expanded it, we've made it secure, we fixed the code, and we can generate digital collections for Asia, for Hawaii and the Pacific pretty quickly, and then they can put the content in. So we're rather neat. This is one of the more recent sites that we basically set up the framework, and the Pacific Librarian took it from there. Again, this is unfindable stuff. I don't know if anyone is a fan of This Old House. It's a U.S. PBS show, but the first host of that was Steve Thomas. He had also previously done research on traditional Pacific navigation and written a book and produced a movie. And he just happened to meet our Pacific